like this meme a lot, by the way. This one's cool. Did you post this one already? I haven't even seen this one. I like this. Conscious, subconscious, unconscious. Wow, this is great.
Pretty cool.
Love can fool you, hate can make you blind. Affections cloud your judgments. If you make decisions when you're happy or sad, you can never be right. Listen now to my advice, the recipe for better life. Hey! Don't follow your heart, it might only let you down. Follow only reason, emotions lead to treason. Only one thing will never let you down. To believe in yourself, believe in the reasons that you have laid out in the argument that will last forever.
Hey, what's up? How's it going, guys?
Am I the only one here?
Nope,
No,
there should
Vincent.
be. Oh, you shaved. I just noticed. Nice look. That's cool.
I did. Thank you.
Tynan's here. Vince is here. Darren's here.
Hey, Darren. Hey, Ty.
Hey, Vincent, hello.
Welcome to the advanced philosophy chats that we're doing with advanced philosophy memes and philosopher memes. This episode's about ego and humility and narcissism and maybe other words in between there.
I'll try my best to be good.
Me too, always. As best I can. I'm excited for today's subject because I've thought a great deal about Narcissist as a mythological character and how Narcissist is an integral part of who we are. And that's what I love about mythology, is how it teaches us who we are. And there's another side to Narcissist that often isn't mentioned, and it's Echo, who fell in love with Narcissus, but Narcissus couldn't see and couldn't observe because he was so obsessed with his own image. And it's interesting to me how they may be two sides of the same coin of unreality.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, the thing is, look, there's a term, right? Empaths. And so that's the mirror opposite of the narcissist, right? The narcissist is focused on self, the empath is feel everyone else. So I guess that character sort of embodies that, he's falling in love with the other instead of self. And and if you wound an empath hard enough, they'll turn off their empathy and become narcissists.
Interesting.
That's interesting. I like that. Hey, welcome, Alosha. How you doing?
Hey, I'm good. We already started, I see.
Well, we just had like a forward just now, but we might want to repeat it to reiterate how interesting it is that often we talk about Narcissus. Well, I don't know if often's the word, but we do. And then Echo gets left out. So Echo's an interesting character. And I also like that because I'm working right now on my interview that I recorded with Ed Annunziata, the creator of the Sega Genesis Echo the Dolphin video game. So Echo keeps coming up, and it was something I asked him about, for why did he do that? Because also it has to do with echolocation and SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, was based on the Order of the Dolphin by John C. Lilly. He believed in Echo as Earth Coincidence Control Office, and they were using Echo as this way of trying to find the sixth sense of empathy. Because if you start to limit your perceptions down to touch, and you start to notice your eyes use photons for touch, your ears use drums for touch, your senses are reduced more and more till you're just using touch. But touch doesn't make a lot of sense with electrostatics. So really, you only really have the sixth sense, which is empathy, the awareness of something else being touched. So Echo is, also the Italian and Latin word for like eureka, to find something. Look, ecce and pictura as Cornelia, like look in the picture as Cornelia. Like in Latin and Italian, Echo comes up often as awareness of something else.
It's funny when Echo keeps coming up like in synchronicity, like just the irony always strikes me. Just the word echo, and then you see it everywhere.
Right. I put up a picture like a week ago, which was the word becoming on a typewriter until the words get scrambled from the page going wrong. And becoming started to say echo because of the C's were doubled over and the O's, and echo, becoming again.
So how does echo tie into the debate of humility and narcissism? I'm just not making the connection
Oh,
yet.
sorry. So earlier we were talking about narcissism as it's related to the Greek myth, and so Narcissus, looks into the reflection and becomes obsessed with themselves, and they cannot, for the life of them, get out of that obsession with themselves. But before that, there's a love between the two beautiful people. I think Echo is.
I have this great book called The Mythic Journey, and on the cover is Narcissus. And it's subtitled The Meaning of Myth as a Guide for Life. And it goes through each myth and discusses kind of from a Jungian perspective. But I like the inside picture too, because there's Narcissus on the left and on the right, and Echo as well. It's only a page long. Would it be too much for me to read the myth? Then we'll all
Go right ahead.
Okay, great. Good intro. So I'll do my best. There was once a young man named Narcissus. His mother, anxious to know her son's fate, consulted the blind prophet Tiresias. Will he live to old age? She demanded. As long as he does not know himself, he replied. So she ensured that the child never saw his own reflection in the mirror. The boy grew up to be extraordinarily beautiful and was loved by everyone he met. Although he had never seen his own face, he guessed from their reactions that he was beautiful. But he could never be sure, so he depended on others telling him how beautiful he was in order to feel confident and assured. Thus, he became a very self-absorbed young man. Narcissus took to walking alone in the woods. By this time, he had elicited so many compliments that he began to think that no one was worthy enough to look at him. In the woods lived a nymph named Echo. She had displeased the mighty goddess Hera by chattering too much, and in exasperation, Hera had taken away her power of speech, except in answer to another's voice. And even then, she could only repeat the last words spoken. Echo had long loved Narcissus and followed him through the woods, hoping he would say something to her, for otherwise she could not speak. But he was so wrapped up in thoughts of himself that he did not notice her trailing behind him. At last, he stopped at a woodland pool to have a drink, and she took the opportunity to rustle some branches to attract his attention. Who's there? He cried. There, came back Echo's reply. Come here, said Narcissus, becoming irritated. Here, she echoed, and glided from the trees, holding out her arms to embrace him. Begone, he shouted angrily. There can be nothing between the likes of you and the fair Narcissus. Narcissus, sighed Echo sadly, and crept away in shame, whimpering a silent prayer to the gods that this proud young man might one day know what it is like to love in vain, and the gods heard. Narcissus turned back to the pool to drink and was presented with the most beautiful face he had ever seen. He instantly fell in love with the stunning youth before him. He smiled, and the beautiful face smiled back. He leaned into the water and kissed the rosy lips, but this touch broke the clear surface, and the beautiful youth vanished like a dream. As soon as he withdrew and was still, the image returned. Don't despise me in this way, Narcissus pleaded with the image. I am the one that everyone else loves in vain. Vain, cried Echo sorrowfully from the woods. Again and again, Narcissus reached into the pool to embrace the lovely youth, and every time, as if in mockery, the image disappeared. Narcissus spent hours, days, and weeks staring into the water, neither eating nor sleeping, only murmuring, alas. But his words only came back to him from the unhappy Echo. At last, his heavy heart stopped beating, and he lay cold and still amid the water lilies. The gods were touched by the sight of such a beautiful corpse, and transformed him into the flower which now bears his name. As for poor Echo, who had invoked such punishment on his cold heart, she gained nothing but grief from her answered prayer. She pined away until nothing was left of her except her voice, and even to this day, she is still allowed the last word. That's
wow. The values of humility, but also the problems of narcissism, but also there's a benefit there to ego itself. So there's a certain a kindling, a spiritual or a sexual kindling that happens, like a romantic relationship that happens because of the value that they put in themselves. They both say that this other person is worthy of them, so they are worthy of the other person, and so they're able to connect. But I think with C.S. Lewis that said, humility is not thinking less of yourself. Humility is thinking of yourself less. And so that distraction with yourself can be like the real toxicity of narcissism.
Yeah, I guess it's also about how you think about yourself, right? Especially if we apply this to like intellectual narcissism, when obviously everyone has like this inclination to think that, well, if something seems reasonable to you, you tend to think that this is truth, that this is the most valid way to look at things, right? And that's kind of what I would like to discuss more, this idea of being motivated by some narcissistic impulses to follow certain ideas, to differentiate yourself from others, to be like, well, I have the right ideas, listen to me, I have gone against everyone and I am the bearer of truth, listen to me, I am the best, I am the wolf and everyone else is a sheep. Sometimes it's then like some positions that are out there, like sometimes feel like people just take them on because they've seen that they can be kind of logically defended for the purpose of debates, and also because they want to differentiate themselves from other people. Once you have a special position that's, it's only your own, and you manage to defend it from certain people, well, then you can think very highly of yourself.
Yeah, I feel like ego can be the root problem and solution, the radical ingredient for fascism. When I've recently been reading a lot of Wilhelm Reich again, and in the mass psychology of fascism, which we were talking about a few episodes ago, the problem with often any sort of ideological movement to better a society is it comes usually from a narcissist. I mean, so the irony there is narcissism can help you escape the fascistic collectivist mentality by thinking, well, they don't know better, society doesn't know better, I know better, I am better, I could, my own answer is better than this, and that's a great actual escape from just falling into the collective epistemology and trying to find your way out into the maverick field or the lone wolf field. But then the problem with that is, and you say, you know what, and then everyone else that's wrong, they should be more like me because my dharma is right for everybody. And then that becomes where narcissism it becomes its own, it eats itself, and it becomes the problem that it tried to salute.
I think that there's a natural impulse to, looking to others as role models, but the narcissist is like, I am the supreme role model. He doesn't let other people decide. He's already decided that he's the best. So, but I have a question, like, the hero complex is part of narcissism, the savior complex, but is an actual hero, like, does he have that complex? Is it only a complex when you're wrong? Like, what if there is actually a reason to be heroic and do things that are heroic? Like, you need to have the ego behind it to take the action, so it's not inherently bad.
Right. So that, I think maybe that's the difference between Batman and Superman, kind of, like Superman doesn't really want what he has, and it's actually a burden, but he has to use it all the time. And Batman maybe is more aware that they have all these problems, but they're better than everybody else, and they work and strive to be better than everybody else.
Right.
Even though they don't have the super ubermensch quality that Superman's born with. They're reaching for it,
right? Well, that's the thing. Batman, his persona is the narcissist. Bruce Wayne is the narcissistic, like, playboy. That's his character that he plays and pretends to be, instead of being his true self, which is his brooding shadow, basically. While Superman, it's inverted. He pretends to be weak, to be humble, to be modest, while actually wielding supreme power. So
I think there's certain levels that I disagree with some of this. I think there's certain extremes of how people are looking at narcissism as a whole without looking at it within a, I guess, a partiality of something. That's where, like, you know, some things aren't really done out of self-love. Sometimes it's actually done out of a collective love. And, you know, we have to differentiate that to some level, because we can't just label everything a narcissist as well.
Sure.
I mean, it's the extreme of self-love where it's like it's only my way or the highway that really you determine a narcissist. And, you know, that's where, to me, you have to kind of like draw, you know, certain lines for certain extremes to not just label everyone a narcissist. Because I mean, sometimes like you do things out of self-hate, you know, to try to do things, or not really self-hate, but like, you know, more for a collective group over yourself. And, you know, that's really what humility is to me in a lot of ways, kind of like what you said about Superman. Well, whenever you have Superman in his, I guess, full format in the suit and everything, there is a bit of self-love. You know, he'll get in front of a camera and accept everything. But I mean, you know, he does lower himself to kind of like, you know, keep his head low within a population, you know,
Right.
to minimize himself to Clark Kent.
yeah, so he acknowledges that as a hero he becomes an icon, but people want to be icons of heroes instead of actual heroes. So that's where it becomes a problem. They're just like, I am heroic before doing the heroic thing. And that's narcissism, you know.
Going back to the myth, I think it's important to ask ourselves, what is the relationship between Echo and Narcissus? Is there a relationship? Now, without relating, there can be no relationship. And each of them, it seems to me to be a great warning. And each are making the opposite mistake as to not be acknowledging even themselves or the other. And there's a dialectic we have as social beings in someone being outside of ourselves and having the empathy for how they may feel. It was a curse by Hera. She was talking too much and attracting too much attention from the other nymphs. So she can only, who am I is always a good question in psychology and philosophy. And she can talk a lot and project out. And that was her curse, is that she could only do that from then on. But she can only see Narcissus. She can't be herself. And he can only focus on himself and only have this, from this book that I posted a picture of, it talks about narcissism as a problem of identity. Who do we identify with? Do we know ourselves, and how do we develop ourselves? And also, what limitations do we put on ourselves with our own psychological growth or spiritual growth if we aren't able to remove our attention from solely our personal needs? These 14-month-year-olds couldn't do that. And within some more time, the brain is able to, as you said, have sense other people's desires and wills and dreams and hopes. And what is it about being a human being that requires us to ask those questions, who other people are, but never forgetting who we are ourselves? This goes back to something I accidentally discovered last night, researching my Gopniki fascination with Slavic Gopniks. And I saw it was a Gopnik, and it said something along the lines of experiment. And I clicked on it, and it was a video from the 80s of a professor from Berkeley named Miss Gopnik, Dr. Gopnik. And long story short, she had two groups of children, 18-month-old kids and 14-month-old kids. She put two bowls. Well, first she put two bowls in front of the kids, one with broccoli and one with candies. And she ate the candies and gave a face of repulsion as if it was something gross. But the kids, of course, naturally love the candies because of the sugar. But then when she eats the broccoli, she makes it very clear that, this broccoli is very, very good. I love this broccoli. She puts it back and then asks the children to give her which food she preferred. Every 14-month-year-old would give her the candy regardless of what they had observed, what she was asking. They just thought more of what I love to you. And that is their way of giving. Well, maybe not yet. It's interesting to think about what giving and receiving is. And I think that that's another good point to keep in mind. But then the 18-month-year-olds would, even though they knew that they preferred the candy, they saw that the broccoli was something much more preferred by the teacher. And so as a stage of development, and narcissism being an essential part of self-preservation and even survival, is that we have to understand both there is a me and a you. And it's the communication between these two aspects are perhaps not only physical between two different human beings, but within ourselves. Who is the narcissist in each of us? Who is the echo in each of us? I also think it's advice about feminine, masculine, and how men and women, or the two within ourselves, communicate to one another. And listening is an essential part of it all too.
I think echo might be representative of not being able to communicate out of fear somewhat. I mean, so it's not the same as Cassandra, right? Cassandra has the gift of prophecy, but can't be understood. Echo can't communicate that she's in love with Narcissus, and has to watch him fall in love with himself, which is this, kind of hell scenario. But she's unable to express herself, maybe not because she doesn't know what she wants. It sounds like she knows what she wants, but she's afraid to admit it. She's afraid to publicly express it, and afraid to, there's something wrong with the fact that she has this egotistical feeling. Wanted to pop up this awesome book. So we've been doing, aside from the advanced philosophy memes and philosopher memes chat, psyche meme now. And so one of the things, psychology is becoming relatively, it's worth knowing terms. It's worth using both. But I was just going to recommend this rad book, Quantum Psychology Notebooks in general by Stephen Walensky are great. He's got a whole series of these. But The Way of the Human is a really good, I mean, even if you started with the third book, because you just don't have time to read like all of them, he goes through all the myths as quantum psychologies to say that every character is part of you. And so every story is your psychology, and you have the part of you that is you being your father, the part of you being your daughter. Jung did this with dreams a lot, like which part of each character isn't, you're not one character in the movie, like those make up your psychology and your being. So looking at, like, for instance, the Icarus myth, where a father's made huge mistakes and accidentally killed a boy, and then he runs off with his son, and he tries to keep his son safe from the Minotaur, which he's essentially built the maze to trap the Minotaur for the king, which is the king's own primal energy and his beast-like energy, which his wife loves, and then she's disguising herself as a beast to be with this Minotaur, which is the primal energy. Then the boy tries to reach the sun when he makes him his wingsuit, and the sun in Hellenism is God, so trying to become one with God or become godlike, which is obviously going to melt his wings and drop him into the sea. The deluge of Poseidon. So there's all sorts of these, mythological characters and stories, which at one point or another represented, feelings and ideas, and not just a king or a person, but parts of you.
What is quantum psychology?
So quantum psychology, as Walensky's disguised it to mean, is really philosophy of psychology. But it really, when he's saying that there is a quantum to your mind, and that everyone's mind is filled with thoughts. So we have qualitatively decided which parts of your mind are these parts or that parts, when really minds all fit into thoughts. And so these thoughts transcend the mind. And each one of us has, this is how we found noosphere and shared experience and empathy, even, because the idea that we're separate versus whole is just so, it's built in this electronic universe idea that we're made up of atoms, or we're made up of electrons, or we're made up of both interacting. What Einstein was trying to, get out of Lemaire. It's like, so there really is a quantum physics to thought. And that's where things get really metaphysical and people get kind of into pseudosciences, but I like when they use logos to describe them instead of physics, because quantum physics, we constantly have to reevaluate. Quantum logos, it's more about you reevaluating yourself and your experiences.
Okay, yeah, that's why I asked, because sometimes when they put quantum mechanics into some other field, it quickly boils down to some, pseudoscientific or misunderstandings, or just some inflation of God knows what parts of the theory. Okay.
That tends to be exactly the problem. I agree. So if you're worried about that, don't worry about that with this guy. Walensky does a really great job taking it apart and using the word properly instead of associating it with quantum physics. He's using the word quantum, like from quality and quantity and relativity. So in Gestalt, you have similarities and you have differences. So Martin Buber talks about unanimity -1 and shape and Gestalt. This is just a continuation of the idea of Gestalt and Gurdjieff. And Gurdjieff also is a great example if you're interested in Enneagrams and personality psychology. There's a lot there. Actually, I might look up that really quickly.
Okay, as soon as you said Gestalt, you got me. So
yeah, duck Gestalt. That's one of my favorite words. Are you familiar with the Enneagram?
With what?
The Enneagram. This shape on the screen here. Do you see it?
No. Yeah, I see it, but I'm not familiar with it.
So the four-way is a figure published in 1949 by George Gurdjieff, who was a Georgian, or where was he? Armenian? I think he was a Russian philosopher of Armenian and Greek descent. And this guy with this great mustache right here is Gurdjieff. And you can find, I mean, one time I was in a train in Paris and I was trying to get to the Euro Disneyland, and some guy with an Enneagram on his necklace, I was like, hey, nice Enneagram, or like, nice necklace, it looks like an Enneagram. He's like, oh, and he pulls out this he's like a witch with long hair and a cowboy hat in France, right? He pulls out this giant book this big on the 1979 Big Sur practices of, the Gestalt workshops and Gurdjieff Enneagram courses. And it's all the journals recorded of interactions between people working on their psychology therapies back in the 60s, and, Jack Kerouac and everyone who went through it. But he suffice to say, he invented the fourth way as like a new kind of education, which could never be completed, and it had to do with connecting a group of 9 people that have different kinds of personality qualities, and how people will compose themselves into an Enneagram even if they are relatively balanced. If you put a group of people together, they will end up fulfilling the roles of a group. They'll say, okay, all of a sudden I'm going to be the tester, I'll be challenging the situation more, or someone else will be like, I'll be the supportive person. And they end up also having musical what do you call it, chromatic and cymatic patterning, where there's harmonies given. So this was very popular in the 60s, and you had people doing Gurdjieff personality psyche dances, ritual dances where they were spinning like Russian dolls, and this led to nudism and all kinds of exciting things in psychology at that time. But really, like, his whole idea was just the spiritual idea that we have soul, and that Geist, the Hegelian Geist, we have Geist, and that Geist is connected beyond the a priori that Kant referred to as our own individual being. We have shared being as well, and because of that we balance each other out.
I like how you wrapped that up. These many parts make up a single entity, and you're describing how important spirits are to mythology is often what is so instructive and a good guide for life. To touch upon the narcissist, another example, I often think about Satan's rebellion from heaven as a mythological motif for ourselves, and narcissism in particular. Another note, I was reading this book called The Dark Triad, and it's about the 3 qualities that are part of dark psychology. Like, humility is a virtuous quality, but the opposite I don't know if it necessarily is narcissism, but seems to me that if you put stories out there and you put out images and words, you can inspire or different qualities to organically come up, and you can increase a society's or an individual's narcissism. That may serve nefarious interests, because if they can make us selfish, then we can fall apart by our own narcissism. There's covert narcissism where it's known, and then there's there's overt narcissism where it's known that you are manipulating someone, and then there's covert narcissism where you're unaware of it. And every day we can do these things where we're accidentally or subconsciously manipulating others. And it's important to kind of watch for our own behavior, because the less aware we are of others, the maybe it's the consequence, the less aware we are of ourselves.
To kind of add to that a little bit, I don't know, it might be a good transition point to like talk about like the id, because you made a relationship with I guess Satan, or just Christian mythology as a whole. I honestly have always kind of seen like the devil, and I guess maybe even humans as kind of like being the ego. Well, I'm sorry, the devil being the id, and then humans kind of like being the ego, and then like the representation of angels kind of being like the super ego. I don't know, to me that was, I guess, always a very close representation, I guess from Freud. I'm not really too sure, was he Christian or was he, I'm not really sure what he really identified as, but it kind of seemed like there was a lot of Western mythos that
Freud wasn't very Christian, I don't think. I think he was like a neo-atheist, but didn't he was like of Jewish descent, I think.
Yeah, Jewish descent, but atheist as far. What
Yeah.
is it called? Materialist, he would say.
Jung picks up the symbolism. But I thought it was interesting to go back to a point that Andreas made, is that there's in the mass psychology of fascism, is that there's value to rebellion. This is part of the paradox, is what can we learn from the character example of Satan? Now, the thing is, he's allowed to leave, but he's eternally, he's causing it himself where he can never return. Why won't he? What desires does he have? who is he serving in the end? And how is he coercing the demons to follow him using half truths and dancing between what is true and false? Yeah.
Well, it all depends on, of course, the nature of reality at that point, but within the mythos of Christianity, like it treats it like the devil is a divine scapegoat. He's there to serve a role, and that's to lift us from below when we're at our lowest. He's like the divine testing rod. If you give in to temptation, then you're essentially failing the test. And then I don't know, maybe it's like a place that gets rid of all the data, like that's where the sin sends you. I don't know. But when it comes to the application of Satan as a sort of a representation of, say, self-worship, well, it's sort of obvious that it becomes a tool to take yourself out of your lowest position. The amount of people I know who have turned to sort of a darker archetypal force when they're at their lowest has prevented them from killing themselves. Like it takes self-worship, because self-worship is to a degree self-love. So you have to love yourself enough to be your, I guess, dark version. Like you gotta embrace that aspect when everything else fails you. Anyways, that's my
Yeah, that also ties into the terror management theory, right? People who are faced with some existential threats or something, they tend to be the most violent in their or the most solid or aggressive. Yeah, that would be the best word for it. Most aggressive with their beliefs, right? If there's been plenty of studies on that terror management theory, right? If people don't have, if they feel threatened, they have to cling onto something, and then they just try to cling onto their core beliefs, which makes them who they are, right? The beliefs that make up your identity.
Sure. But if their beliefs fail them, then they invert the values to find value in what they missed.
you see this generationally a lot. So you have the yuppie parents, right? Because you have the 60s hippies, at least where I'm from, and the hippies really like a lot of them died. They died in Vietnam, or they died of drugs, or they didn't get good jobs or kids or something. So like there's the yuppies who survived all that, and they think to themselves that they have all the answers. And so eventually they're telling their kids, we can make sure that you're safe. You just have to do what we say. You dumb kid. You're reminding me of the other kids who I saw who were killing themselves by taking drugs and going to Woodstock. And so they want to control the kids because they know that as long as they're in charge, because of the sink or swim, they swam, so they swam. So they think that everyone else around them should do exactly what they're doing. Ironically, society shifts, and you can't just keep doing the same thing, because eventually chaos will learn that your tricks, and it will continue to hunt you. You know, chaos will hunt you down. So you need to
like
have new
conservative
answers.
hippies.
Yeah, I mean that's what
like conservative.
It's like,
orthodox hippies, basically, who are like, this is the true doctrine. I know how to live.
Absolutely. The boomers who made the Ben and Jerry's ice cream, who drive Lexuses and Mercedes and everything. It's not, things don't change that much. There's a German movie called Der Educators, which is a fascinating film, and it talks a lot about how these young leftists kidnap in Hamburg a wealthy man. He used to be a 70s radical, but now he's become a wealthy man with a lake house. So they have this conversation because they're socialists, and they're trying to stop they're anarcho socialists. They want to destroy the Nike factories that are bringing these shoes to Germany, and selling them for 150 euros and paying kids like 50 cents to make. But the thing is, as they're doing this, they start to see what happens to people as they get older. And this has been something that comes up a lot is, you throw down Marx when you get your first paycheck, but then you pick up Trotsky and you try to figure out how you can deal with all the bills that you're starting to accumulate that you can't afford with your paycheck, like your healthcare and everything else.
An image to kind of meditate on. Let me see if I can flip this. Yeah. Oh, you can't see that very well. 1 second.
Your room is very popular with people. Yeah, I've heard chats. I love your plague mask. People see this man has art and books.
Thank you. So this was one of the first things that I kind of put together. I just made it a creative project. I was bored, and I love medieval art, and I love antiquity, and but anyway, so there's, what's his name, Baphomet on the lower level. The middle level is what I see as the human plane that we all live on, and then the top tier is where the angels and God resides.
Well, that's pretty interesting. You got like the Hummel children in the center of it all, and then demon gargoyles below.
Yeah, and I love Germany. So we live there, but to think of an overworld and an underworld, a nominal world, and how it influences us, and especially with how humans developed, where these characters we write down educate us about who we are as human beings. And it's interesting to think that both of these levels influence the middle world that we live on. And that's what forms the complete paradox. Another book that I liked a lot, just to mention, is called Transformation. I'm trying to flip this back. And it's by Robert A. Johnson, who's another Jungian psychoanalyst, and he just passed away. I really wanted to visit him before he did. But it talks about stages of development, where this book, Transformation, where his advice for how to understand the multiple layers of consciousness. And it uses literary examples where the first character, and it's also interesting because it follows a first dimension, second dimension, third dimensional understanding of who we are, to get back to how we perceive others, and how that reflection of others reflects upon us and encourages our own self-reflection. But Don Quixote is the first level, where he can only fight the windmills, and he only projects what is in his own imagination onto the world, and he sees them to be dragons and all. But what he's interacting with is purely within his own mind, and as kind as Gordo may be, he's never able to shake him from this forward projection of what reality is. The second tier, that's where we get our second dimension, is Hamlet, where Hamlet is aware of what he needs to do to to avenge his father, but he can't act. He can't make a decision, and he is almost has self-imposed shackles on his ability to do what is needed in life. And then the third tier, where we get our third dimension of understanding, is the example is Mephistopheles from Faust, is that when you pair yourself with your dark elements and you integrate them using light, you synthesize and find yourself once again back in the middle, where there is two sides to any coin, or to all reality and all physical reality. The last thing is that Jung, before he passed away, was very focused upon a fourth stage, the number 4. And you had mentioned something, Andreas, about the anagram and 4. And I just find 4 to be an interesting number. Is where do we go from our third dimension? Oh, it was the sense, and empathy being like a forgotten sense. And so it's interesting to think how our consciousness, when we're more conscious, will change and transform us.
You know something, Darren, I wanted to add on to what you were saying earlier about the dark tetrad, or I'm sorry, triad. It's actually, I think they're including another fourth for the I guess, for a tetrad now, in which they included sadism onto the whole bunch, which I don't know. I just wanted to add to that, that you're, I guess, fascinated with the 4 levels of something, I guess, towards like
Islam also has 4
conscious.
pillars,
And that fourth element that was included to make it from the triad to, what is it called when you have 4? A quadra.
The tetrad.
Tetra. Thank you. Yeah, it made me think of the book Transformation, is that we evolve in a positive way with virtues to become past our third dimensional understanding of ourselves and how we relate to others. But then there's also the opposite end of that. And the other 2 elements of the dark triad are Machiavellianism and psychopathology. And so when we understand our own tendencies to be psychopathic, or to be narcissistic, or to be Machiavellian, how we use others to serve our own interests, we can catch them much better. It seems to me to be always there. And the less conscious we are of it, the more it comes to dominate our lives, and then unconsciously dominate the lives of others and how we interact with them. So it's like a poison. It's like a toxic poison. And part of our task, I think, as humanity, is to be humble, to bring it back to humility, and to understand the purpose of treating each other well.
There is another side to the coin too. I don't think it's a tetrad though. They have a light triad as well, which is interesting. I don't remember who exactly came up with that, but it's basically, well, they didn't make it like the opposite version of dark triad or tetrad or anything. It was just more or less they were trying to accumulate all the different, like, I guess, good values that certain types of people would accumulate together. And I don't know, I just think it's something, interesting to look into. I haven't like explored it fully yet, but definitely think it's something to talk about.
This book warns us to look for these traits in people, and it makes me think of Ted Bundy, a classic narcissist. But if we think of narcissism as a problem of identity, how is it that we know when we see people acting narcissistically, it's really to protect something very fragile and very vulnerable? And if they were to give their attention to what is underdeveloped, are they able to get out of the trap that is narcissism, which causes psychological and emotional death? If we aren't interacting with ourselves and with others authentically, then it's as if we're mindless, and that scares me.
Well, like I had said it earlier, that I've seen, like, the empath aspect, where you have, it's like the polar opposite of the narcissist, where the narcissist is completely internally focused. The empath is more so inclined towards feeling other people's feelings and understanding other people.
Is
And
Echo an empath? Do you think Echo's an empath?
I think Echo is the fanatical aspect of an empath. So it's like the empath who falls in love with someone else's, I don't know, the total sum of who they are or who they project, you know. And like, you know, narcissism is sort of a persona. It's a trauma-based persona that emerges and that you fabricate to coexist with the world. So it's a set of defense mechanisms. It's not really you experience being a narcissist as a result of, you know, how you think you need to defend yourself from the world and control your experience of the world. So I think that that's probably the core of it. It's just people that neglect their empathy and focus internally because, you know, I mean, if everyone else is shit, then you're not shit in your own, and by your own standards, then you're basically a god compared to them, you know. So yeah.
If Satan didn't have the pride he did, and he wasn't determined to serve himself exclusively with the help of his minions, what is it? How could it be more like the myth of the prodigal son, or however you want to say that, is where the prodigal son goes to the city to visit with things that are dark within himself and these tendencies that come about by our indulgence and hedonism. But for him to return to the good is him acknowledging who he is and where he's come from. Why can't Satan? And what happens to us if we don't? I always often wonder.
So another thought then is humility and magnanimity in, you know, Nietzsche and Christianity. So talking about Nietzsche's ideas of the slave morality, which also comes up more, actually I should look up a more modern example, is Brezhnev. How do you spell the name? Brzezinski, not Micah, but the father. Zbigniew. Yes. Okay. Shortly, the public will be unable to reason or think for themselves. They'll only be able to parrot the information that they've been given on the previous night's news. This is from 1979, a technotronic future. And so most of the world that we live in, like the Facebook future and the Google Analytics future and the Pokemon Go, comes from this man. And he had some pretty interesting ideas. The technotronic future is an essential read for the future of authoritarianism. But I want to find the perfect quote. I think it's the one where he says, "A select few."
Is he a former KGB officer? It sounds like active measures.
Yeah, some pretty. He actually worked with the Obama and
good.
and Kerry and Reagan, perhaps. I know he has a pretty interesting long history. I think he survived like the Red Purge, Nazi Germany and Warsaw. He lived right up to like a few seconds ago, kind of thing, and like did everything. But I think this is the one. Yes, the technotronic era involves the gradual appearance of a more controlled society. Such a society would be dominated by an elite, unrestrained by traditional values. And so this gets into the difference that Nietzsche talked about between humility and magnanimity, because with humility, you're often easier to control if you're more modest and you have less, demands on each other's egos. So then what happens is the magnanimous can come forward and demand the world be in their image, and people conform to that. And so this is a big problem with, like identity, ego politics, megalomania, people that never think that they have enough because they always have to have more in order to be less afraid they're going to have everything taken from them. A lot of society is kind of divided into like, should I sink or should I swim? And then this is what you get. If you culminate that to if you galvanize everyone that way, eventually you'll be stuck with very extremes at the end of the spectrum. And so you have some people that are so extreme that they're James Bond villains. But then the other thing is that a problem? Because if we have people that think that they know what the world is supposed to be like, and then you have humble people that just do what they're supposed to do and they conform to that, maybe this is some sort of a caste system. And Nietzsche has talked a lot about this Übermensch caste system. By the way, his sister, Elizabeth Forster Nietzsche, who, you know, he clearly loved and gave him a lot of his great ideas, ended up actually building a racist utopian colony
Yeah.
in Paraguay, which I ended up visiting accidentally. I had to learn the story there. I came to San Bernardino, Paraguay, and it's like, so whatever happened here? It's like, oh, you didn't know, did you? Well, yeah, Nietzscheans to their fullest extent trying to create a you know, an Uber race, but not just for Aryan Nordicness, you know, because it's Nietzsche. Like they cared a lot about creating an elite that were outside of the traditional values and that could then control other people, and would, you know, their values would essentially be, you know, kill if they wanted to, or do what they had to get whatever they wanted to done. And so that actually is in a weird way more terrifying than any sort of you know, racial identity for their state, is that their ideology was to have, you know, complete abstention from any sort of consequences from the law or from morality, especially morality, and that they could then dictate what the world should be like and other people should follow.
It's just
I
good to
forget.
note that Nietzsche's sister really had her own interpretation of his brother's work, right? She really pushed it into some special areas just to make it more pleasing for well, the people who leaned into a Nazi society. So
I wonder about that. Do you think that it's, I mean, because a lot of what I was told in school was like, oh, Nietzsche, you know, he got his ideas from his sister. And then he tried to downplay it or didn't understand it as well as, you know, she was like, no, bro, you don't get it. Like, is it not really that she's
She
running the
stole
show?
his writings and morphed his meaning to serve her own ambitions. And who I was going to ask, Narcissus, do you guys agree that Narcissus died because he did not want to give himself to others? I forget who it was that mentioned a part of humility or something was to give yourself to others. And how is love attached to that? Giving yourself to others. Now, is she, by taking his writings, who is she serving? And how, and what was the original intention of like the concept of the Übermensch?
would you say that you can be narcissistic and also a lot of your narcissism coming from the idea that you give yourself to others, like they need you, that you made the biggest sacrifice and then they worship you after you die or something?
Terrorism. Giving yourself to others is a great way to kill your own ego, but then the benefits come from the sense of belonging and the sense of meaning that is manufactured. And it could be quite, it's maybe the most existential gift we can give to others, but receive ourselves.
It's funny watching the way energy flows through a person when they give that much. You see like people that, because they're so selfless, you know, limousines and lottery tickets open themselves up to them. This is interesting. We should maybe bring up, so you guys know, I don't want to go too deep into the Red Skull thing, because if we give it away, then philosopher memes can't have Red Skull memes anymore. But have you guys been what do you think it really, at the end of the day, who is Red Skull ideologically? Like, what is the deal ideologically with this character?
Well, you know, he's a Nazi who became more powerful than Nazis, so he made his own branch of Nazism. And to equate anyone with Red Skull is to say he's a Nazi. So there's no real difference there. But it's interesting to see like the sort of narrative hijacked that way. It's like Red Skull became a surrogate for, I guess, people's projections of other people as bad. So it's just like, well, I don't agree with you, therefore I can write you as the Red Skull. And it's very strange because, you know, like he was always spouting Nazi-based ideology, and I don't think I've ever heard anything resembling who he's being associated to.
Yeah, often it seems like the collectivists, it's sort of like they're beating up other people to make it feel like they're not fascists themselves, but they're doing it in Doc Martens, so it doesn't work. But yeah, there's definitely a certain amount of hate that is ignorance based and dynamic, but it doesn't also exclude the fact that there's a fear coming from this abstract idea of I don't know, because the word pride is thrown around today so often, right? To have pride, or to have ego, to have narcissism, or maybe what's a collective version of narcissism? Is that nationalism? Is that centricism? Ethnocentrism, maybe supremacy?
I would say it's
Sir,
pretty much nationalism, right? I mean, we are the ones. It's our nation who has to prosper.
it's interesting to think that being afraid to not be the best is a phobia. It's almost as if nationalism is a defense mechanism, again, for not knowing who you are, a lack of self-awareness.
So, sorry, go on.
I was just going to ask about the Red Skull. There's two ends of it. Is it a dehumanization? Do you boil someone down to just being a Nazi, which is an abstract concept? It could be used to defend, but then to also offend and to also dismiss. And discussion is often dealing with what isn't wanting to be observed. And I wonder what is underneath the Red Skull. Is it the rainbows, or is it something else?
Well, there used to be, he used to be a symbol for like counter propaganda, right? You had Nazi propaganda, and then Captain America came along, and he was meant to be the emblem against Nazism. And so he was always meant to be like a propaganda figurehead. And of course, because Nazism is stupid, it's justified, like that they make this. But by deconstructing him, they turned it into a generalized tool for propaganda from there on. And generally, the ideas put in there were always anti-fascistic, right? Like it was always going, hey, Nazi-based stuff is bad. But now it's just being deconstructed even further, because that's what deconstructing art does. It just turns it into another tool for someone else, basically. But yeah, I wanted to bring up, you brought up pride, right? And it made me think of the seven deadly sins, because pride is one of them, and they're mirror opposite, the seven virtues. And so for pride, the equivalent virtue is humility. And to have pride is to lose sight of your own need for humility, because pride auto justifies anything. You can do anything if you're proud, and it always leads to problems. But it's sort of a counter response to other things. You develop pride because someone tells you not to be proud in what or to be ashamed rather of what you have and what you are. And so you have to have the balance between pride and it's like, the way to see it is that they're two sides of the same coin, and you have to have the middle ground. You have to be able to wield this. It's like, it's like sex isn't bad, but what makes sex a sin is abusing it. And so abusing anything is always going to lead to these sort of problems. So don't abuse the concept of pride. Have humility when wielding pride is the best way to do it, in my opinion.
I like the map here, except for the practical advice. Always when it comes to practical advice, what do they even say? Like examine relationships, avoid porn. I mean, come on. Lust and chastity. Like this is maybe for a 7th grader. It probably has more to do with like showing love. But then we're gonna have to do an episode on the 7 kinds of love, won't we?
Hey, with Narcissus, he clearly had pride, but did she have a lack of pride? I have these cool books, one for every one of the 7 deadly sins. I'm always introducing books: sloth, greed, gluttony, and pride. But the pride book isn't about it being quite what's the lack of virtue, like a hindrance to self-development, but it's about how important pride is. It's written from the perspective of an African American, about how pride in certain ways help you know who you are. But Echo didn't know who she was, just like Narcissus didn't know who he was, but for opposite ends of the spectrum of maybe too much or too little of pride.
Know thyself.
Know thyself.
want to find a more quality resolution picture for Bushido. So you guys, you ever heard of the 7 virtues of Bushido? Do you guys know what Bushido is in Japanese karate and ninja ethic? Here we go. Okay, this is probably as clear as I can find. So you have integrity, respect, heroic courage, honor, compassion, honesty, sincerity, and duty, loyalty. So, you know, of these, you start to see kind of it swarms around this idea of Bushido, which is like the full holistic respect or honor. But honor and respect and sincerity are there's sort of a triad around the septagram. You know, it's like a 7-pointed, like a star, and that you can connect these concepts pretty clearly. If you're not doing all of them, are you really doing any of them, kind of an idea. But honor is better than pride, right? So like honor is beyond pride. It's something that you earn, but it's also something that you gain, and it's something you strive for. Kind of like health is something to be, is like mental health is an achievement, I think was something we said recently in psyche memes. It's not just like a right. Like, so often people want to go into something saying like they have been born with this, as opposed to like they've come to earn this. And that's, you know, a pretty decent philosophy. It might be not fair to call Bushido exotic, but it's pretty much like the opposite of telling a child that they're born fully special. It's more like you're born obliged to know that you can do right and you're able to do wrong, and you know that doesn't make it okay. Like, well, society will judge you, your parents will observe it, the consequences will still happen to you. Like nature, you know, like if you open a flood gate, then you will be flooded. So those consequences are taught, even if we try to hide them from people. Eventually, you know, they get to experience the natural flow of consequence. So honor seems to be like the thing we need the most.
It's interesting to think about every society having its own guideposts for how a person develops. Which virtues and values do we select as a society? And it's sometimes we have to rebel against that to individualize, but to also include is natural and expected, because you have to navigate, you have to somehow be on the same page as those around you. So different societies have different guidelines as to what they want from you, and that puts interesting pressure on us to be something else, but then be who we are. It's, yeah, maybe a way to find progress. I don't know.
I wanted to find that book on Kantian morality. Let me see if I can share that really quickly. So this is a book I thought was pretty interesting, between Aristotle and Paul, and it's sort of this idea that Kantian ethics of humility exist. And a lot of people would think that Kant is aware that he's the greatest because people are setting their clocks to him. But it's in that tradition of St. Augustine that we do what we must, because it is right that we do it, not for reward. Oh, this is published on my birthday. That's pretty cool. But yeah, the awareness of your ability to do better should not make you feel like you're the best. It's just that you should feel aware that there's more going on here, that you were bestowed with this rather impressive body, like that has an impressive number of senses and feelings, and that we're able to communicate with each other and with nature, and is so much more impressive than so much other. We've been trying so hard to reach other things, right? Like right here, there's this great thing that we can be focused on, and we should take responsibility for that. And trying to communicate and make better solutions, that's more of an obligation than it is just you know, a right or something to be proud of. Like you're, you know, people constantly say like, I am proud of you. Maybe they could be saying like, I, you know, I honor that you did that.
I can't remember the context, but I read, I believe it's like an Eastern European myth, but long story short, there's a pious man who everybody in the village sees to be humble to the nth degree, and so giving and so generous, so great. He has a wife who because of his piety, he doesn't observe. He doesn't treat her well at the home. This is their own little secret. But then she finds herself into the arms of a man who offered her something that the pious man was not giving her. That led to intimacy. When he found out about this adultery, and the village found out about it, he told everyone in the village how he loved his wife and he would forgive her because chastity is forgiveness is the greatest value and virtue. Well, as he tells them this, but then comes home, slowly the anger and resentment of her betrayal eats away at his understanding of himself, and he develops a hunch where he's bent over and can't stand straight, but everybody in the village thinks that he's great. Well, he's visited by an angel who says, this is the part that I can't remember very well, but basically the only way to rid yourself of your, I'm going to put a pebble in your mind or something in order to, as a punishment. And every one of these pebbles will create greater weight for you. And you have to give the pebble back by thinking highly of your wife or having love for her. And only by transforming the negative feelings into the positive feelings was he able to reacquaint himself with his wife and heal himself to heal their relationship. So humility can be a persona, or it can be a genuine way to heal ourselves and heal others. What is it? What within humility is a gift? Is there love attached to it? Observance of others. How do we have to observe others in order to love others? And then how do we find ourselves back to who we are from that?
Well, I think humility and persona are tied in the sense that your persona can reflect you authentically. But if you're not authentic, then it doesn't really matter. You can't have fake humility, like that's not a thing. That's psychopathic. It's, you're crafting this sort of idea
Right.
that that's narcissistic, really, because you're creating this idea so that people will like you instead of actually embodying it properly. So you push it to your shadow, and then that's where you abuse your wife or something.
But that's Jeremy Bentham's utilitarianism, and that's what makes the best society, apparently, according to Jeremy Bentham, right? Is that everyone is afraid that if they were to not save the children that die in front of them, so they would live the rest of their life, wondering, what if they hadn't done that? They'll just throw themselves in front of the bus to save the children. So out of selfishness, we do the right thing. That, I mean, not my favorite paradox, but it seems to be the Bentham solution.
Well, yeah, action is rooted in selfishness to a degree, but when it comes to self-awareness, it's also awareness of the ramifications of your actions and what you're doing. It's not as like to think that way is just be like, well, the most good I could do optimally is saving these children right now, when functionally that's just inaccurate. You could help 100,000 children in your life if you don't step in front of a bus. So it's not so black and white.
I think you just made a new trolley problem meme in my head, and it's just the trolley problem with Bill Gates standing there thinking and letting it happen.
And you make the trolley a needle.
Oof, heavy. Well, okay. So another. Wait, Darren, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, maybe I'm opening up a Pandora's box, but I was going to ask if you guys thought that the pious man was being narcissistic. Was he covertly narcissistic at home, overtly narcissistic with the villagers? Because he's manipulating others, but because of that, he can't tend to what he needs to heal, so that his own wound is being self-inflicted.
Trying to hide the problems that he has. Yeah. Because he has pride in his public appearance, because socially you can really bring everything back down for most problems in someone's life to a lack of empathy and awareness of others, and thinking that the best thing to do is keep a non-true communication flowing. So they have this false opinion, which is this other character, which is not him, and he's fine with that, because it means that he doesn't have to actually be vulnerable and open with them, which is the same problem he's having with his wife, ironically. But at the same time, what ends up happening is the weight of trying to lift this mask that he's wearing for everyone so that no one sees what's behind it is starting to wear him down. And so it might end up being to his best benefit to allow them to see him differently, just so that he doesn't collapse under the pressure of this false avatar he's presenting.
Right.
So
Well,
it's narcissism in a way.
yeah, but the narcissist who worships God uses God to justify his narcissism. He goes, my actions are justified because God functions through me. And so from there on, you need basically a God smack to be humbled. It's the only thing that can really work.
Wow, the angel was that God smack. Well said.
You know, and also just to add a little bit, sorry, I'm working on my car right now. I don't know, you were asking like, what is a collective narcissism as a whole? I mean, to me, I feel like you could actually call it that. I've always called it cultural narcissism, but there's other psychologists that, that might even refer to like American narcissism as a cultural phenomenon here in the United States. But I mean, really, I think just labeling it as a cultural narcissism is kind of like a good way to look at certain almost dogmatic principles that certain people like to follow within a culture that kind of like spreads to a collective in a large manner, but also too Kim Wilber, I guess within like integral theory, he likes to call it especially for I guess forms of like American narcissism, he likes to call it boomeritis, which he kind of like I guess limits it down to a certain generation to some extent, but he also makes it well known that it's not just boomers that have this. It's more of just something that I guess generational groups as a collective kind of pass down onto the next generation in a sense. It's just that I think that was his generation that he was kind of competing with growing up. I want to say he was a part of Generation X, and that's why he ended up labeling it boomeritis.
Yeah, so that's the thing about so that's why earlier I was bringing up Martin Buber, and I really do agree actually that we can usually break things down. The problem is when you start to break things down into like higher resolution or lower resolution, you get this quantified. And I know this mainly not from philosophy but from engineering. Like when you have a sine wave and you break it into squares, the squares are flat, so you're not really getting that sine wave, and actually turn your reality sideways. So you're running with Mario, and you'll see that the sine wave is not up and down. It's actually a spiral that's coming towards you like a drill. So we're not getting the whole analog signal that way. And so to recreate that signal, you want to take a higher and higher resolution, smaller and smaller pixel quantization, right? And so we're getting this kind of vibe of what the sound wave is, but it's not the right sound wave. That's the same thing with any argument or perception. So Martin Buber's got this book, right? I and Thou. I want to find that map. It's not very easy to read, but basically you have this idea of unanimity, which is like everythingness, and then you minus one, because the first division is always divided in two. So you could say, okay, well, it's us versus them. Who are we? We're the new people. Well, who are them? Well, everyone, all their parents are dead, right? So now it's just the boomers. So it's us versus the boomers. And that's the beginning of that kind of division. And then they start to become the boomer. And that's, I think someone needs to write that book, Becoming the Boomer, because that's what's going to happen to, I mean, like DMX, rest in peace, like was 51, he was born in 1970. People have a real hard time with the Logan's Run aspect of 1970 being 50 years ago. It's confusing to people that are from 1980, like they're like, wow, that's not that long ago. That means it's coming up. It's this hurricane of age that's coming towards them. But we want so hard, to divide something simply. So you don't want to have, well, it's more complicated than that. We have these different kinds. People just want to be able to say, at the end of the day, it's these two things, and so the I of the basic word I, thou is different from that of the basic word I, it. This idea that we're somehow not all one, starts from I and thou, where it's like, well, I'm different than thou. and then that, that and I, it and that is the next, and then you have a hexagonal division, which is that 4 that you were talking about. But what you want is you want to find like the love that connects each other. And so like love becomes a really complicated thing. And I was really trying to be like, oh man, I don't want to talk about love, like, for so many reasons, right? Like what kind of boy am I? But like Greek words for love, people talk about 4, but there's 7, and that's kind of part of that thing with like musical keys. You have like 4 main, and then you have the 7 because you have the angles. But eros, agape, philia, philautia, I don't know, storge, pragma, ludus, and mania. And so you have pragmatic love, you have an erotic love, you can have like philosophizes, you can have like francophiles, you can have egomaniacs. But you start to notice that some of these words, these other 3, start to disappear from our vocabulary. And that's actually only if you went to college, because for the most part, people don't use those words. They just use the word love, which is a weird, they use a symbol, even an emoji these days for a heart, which is a physical, this doesn't actually look like a physical muscle in your body pumping blood. It looks more like some sort of sacred geometrical pattern. It's 2 golden ratios, right? Right. You see the golden ratio, and it's this spiral here. It's the heart is 2 shells, put next to each other. The way that we're presenting it, it's definitely not like the physical muscle, but it makes you wonder, what am I missing? Like, what am I missing about agape? Like, where's my agape? Like, and where do you get your agape? So,
hey, tattooed on Baphomet's arm is the Latin phrase solve e coagula. I'm sure you guys are aware. And we were talking about breaking down, that's the solve, but the coagula is putting it back together. So with you breaking love down into these different ways of understanding it, and how complex of an understanding the Greek language allowed to express love, putting it back together into a singular emoji or concept, as abstract as it is, as love, is interesting. But you have to put things back together to understand how they fit together.
love is a many splendid thing. But I do notice that people who use have a smaller vocabulary, use less words to describe more things, getting more arguments. I feel like I notice when people, they get really annoyed when someone asks them to break down the words more a lot of the time. And this is the worst stereotype I could possibly say, but I've felt this happen in my life a lot, where people are like, what do you mean? They get really angry because they're like, you should just get it like telepathically. And when you use different words to describe things, it makes it more like if you say I'm sick all the time, as opposed to I'm healing, you should probably be careful, because the words manifest. And if you say my body has a cold instead of I'm sick, doing way better, at least on the way of getting depersonalizing that it's not you that's the sickness. So we need to work on all of our levels of communication.
It's like a form of auto placebo, mimetic placebo effect on yourself. You're
Absolutely
trying to auto regulate your own subconscious.
Yeah, you need to manifest health, and you manifest these ideas that health is. For instance, one thing, there's this kid who's sick and he's dying, and they say, well, we've tried everything else. Why don't you imagine your head where it hurts and it feels heavy, like you have these grains of marbles, like this guy from the adulteress. Imagine those grains of marbles are actually separate from you. And now imagine those grains of marbles are actually light. And like you're able to pour the light through the holes in your head, and you just, as you breathe in, you're filling in with more fresh air, you're exhaling, the oxygen's pushing out the sickness as light through your head, and it's just escaping out like a gas. And just visualize that. And like a few weeks later, the child was dying of some like really like malignant terminal tumor, and started to make major progress, because their biology, their apoptosis started to kick in, and was able to selectively target where the problems were. And so, I mean, these little things are not just chicken soup for the soul. It's, the beginning of real modern medicine, where we're doing both preventative care and attacking the problem at its source through consciousness. The irony being that we're just barely getting back on track to where things were when the barbers were doing this in the Middle Ages, right? Because at some point, people were able to think of disease as consciousness. And, we often think, oh, how heretical it was when people said these people had demons instead of disease, but it wasn't one or the other. It's this idea of like a consequence from a mutiny of the soul, or of the Geist, as Hegel referred to it.
So a thought comes up regarding a story I read. Grant Morrison wrote a book called Super Gods about the history of comic books and the mythological application and the magical application. And he was talking about this thing that happened to him in his 20s, where he was writing a story about his hero getting sick and dying from a parasite that's inside of him, from like a villain that manifests as a disease, basically. And then he started dying. He started getting sick and he nearly died. He was in the hospital in a coma, and then an angelic figure appeared before him, a light, and he just described it as like whatever people would assume to be an angel. That's probably what it was. And it asked him if he wants to continue living or if he wants to stop now, and he decided to keep living. So he got better, and then he finished his story and made the hero get better too. And it was interesting because this guy takes all this stuff very, very seriously. He's all about creating this sort of relationship between the imaginary and reality. And so I can understand, based on what you just said, how he managed to do this. Like, he created a mythological structure preparing his body for being sick, or he made himself sick, I don't know, but he managed to, I guess, come out of it with a purpose even behind his healing. So it was like a multi-meaning way of taking yourself out of your lowest place,
I like that. And I think it really ties back into the ego narcissism thing strongly. And here's why. Because imagine yourself as not an identity, but as a bus full of consciousness and biology and organs. And you're many different, if you think about it, you're a bag of seawater with a nervous system, jellyfish, that's being held in it together. So there's a lot going on with gut fauna and different things that are telling you what you want to eat, that are living in your gut, that you're eating on behalf of. So we're not just one thing. And of diseases, that's a big thing too. People say, I'm not the disease, I have the disease. Like, not just alcoholism, AIDS, like diseases come and take over the body, or they become part of the body. You have like hepatitis and different things. So this is another, aspect of what am I, and which part of myself is the part that is healthy and which part is sick. Because if I have a disease that's part of me and I can get rid of it, maybe, I mean, like, there's ways to do things with oregano oil, and like you can get rid of gut fauna in your system. How much of myself is the thing that I'm proud of, and how much of the myself is not coherent with that? And what do I do to start dividing away consciousness that's not part of me, that's not what I think of as myself, that I am thou, so that I can be a pure version of my own manifestation of Geist.
All right, so this reminds me of just another movie again. I'm sorry, but it's a movie called Dante 01, and it's about the saint who drove out dragons, Saint Peter, if I'm not mistaken. And so
Saint George.
Yeah, that's it, Saint George. So, anyways, but the story is about a cosmic prison. So they live in a satellite that is a prison for the worst criminals in the universe. And he comes in as Saint George, and he basically finds the parasitic organism that is the dragon inside of them that makes them commit atrocities, and then he eats it and purges it. And so this is just a sort of, it got me thinking about parasites living inside of us that influence thoughts, like the idea of something that changes our choices based on what it needs as opposed to what we need, and how we can actually heal this process. And I found the metaphor used in this movie quite apt.
It's interesting, actually, in the Tartarian philosophies, the idea of parasites are pretty prevalent. And the Rodnovery school of thought, which is probably somewhat of a carryover from, the old Tartaric style of, of thinking, was that there's parasites that are controlling not just your mind, because we know about gut parasites, and we've known about that for thousands of years. Before the last 200, 300 years of medicine, people were talking about, I can't see it, but I know that there's something in your brain, or there's something in your gut, and I can see the inflammation, but I can tell you there's a gimp living there that's got a hammer and he's hitting on your brain. Whatever the perspective that they were using, it's weirdly accurate in terms of metaphor for what was really there. But
Right.
they also were thinking that there was a parasite that was controlling your senses, not just your consciousness. Like syphilis makes you think crazy thoughts. Okay, what about something that's like actually making you see things that aren't there, and make you hear sounds that aren't there, and make you feel things that aren't there? That's the kind of parasite that's more interesting, because it's right in line with the Matrix, right? Where we're all of a sudden we're like, wait a second, how much of our perception is limited? We have color blindness is a major. Bill Gates earlier, we're talking, he's colorblind, right? I mean, there's a lot of important people that are colorblind. Whereas in Siberia, you have women that have, and men too, but mainly they have women that have specifically 13,000 shades of color. They can see more than us because they have additional like 2 rods and cone system. And then there's butterflies that can see even more than that. But what if we have parasites that are either limiting our perspective or opening up perspective for someone else? There could be positive symbiosis happening with some of these parasitical symbiosis relationships. Whales have guppies and things that live on them, right? And like and birds that live on the back of cows that keep bugs away. So symbiosis is something we might not even fully be considering when we're worried about parasitic relationships, because clearly your gut fauna is helping you. I mean, if you wanted to empty it all out, you would see the problems with that. And there's, at this point, Yale is indexing fecal transplants to make sure that you have the same gut biome as an Ethiopian, because gut biome can help you. So are we trying to be Freud would call it anal retentive, or are we literally trying to find which parts of nature we're a part of? And that in and of itself is a kind of narcissism of the social organism, right? Because at that point you're saying my identity is a nation. I'm a nation of gut fauna.
So it made me think of what if the snake in the Garden of Eden was a parasite that made them inclined towards needing more sugar or eating the fruit or influencing their thoughts, and that shifted their perspective from good and evil,
Well, I'll tell you what, it's a great metaphor because it's a parasite that never left us.
Exactly, yeah. A term that I came up with some time ago, it's a symneurote, because symbiote is biological and neurote is neurological. So I guess a parasite that influences neurology, or that even spreads through consciousness and ideas and thoughts.
Insights, it makes me think of just simply good influence, bad influence. Viruses are viruses by getting into your system and having your system replicate them without your awareness. And when we were talking about viruses of the mind with memes and how they can influence us, I was wondering about what are narcissistic switches or triggers, so to speak. Are certain societies more susceptible to narcissistic triggers or light switches that turn on and off than others? With individualism being quite opposite of collectivism, is the American society, is it easier to flick on these switches of narcissism for them? And then in which case, how can that be used against people? And is it like a parasitic relationship that Andreas was discussing?
Sorry, I got grab my hands. Yeah, so
that was to your point. Yeah.
Through a lot of I guess like class division in different senses. I guess depending on how well you're doing in life, like I guess, man, I don't know, it's such a broad subject to kind of touch on too, because there's so many layers that you could really touch on. I guess whenever it comes to a lot of the content that we're fed, and just how we divide ourselves individually. I think, through American individuality, especially in our culture, we are a bit more susceptible to narcissism in some ways. I mean, not just American culture. I mean, I would probably say a broad portion of Western culture, you know, uh, but especially American culture, just because there's such a large focus on liberty, through individual rights and everything. Um, I think that kind of helps influence it, because with so much freedom, you do, I guess, question like, well, what is freedom, and how can I maximize my freedom? How much can I, maximize my individuality to, I guess, see what I'm capable of doing with all this freedom? And there's a lot of self-love there, and I guess you can go to different extremes of like, well, how can I maximize my property ownership? How much can I maximize my, just value in life as a whole? And that's I guess something interesting about, you'll notice about people's houses and, their cars and, all the wealth that they can kind of like accumulate together. I just think that it gives us, a broader sense of freedom, and this is kind of like spreading throughout the world as well. Like people kind of use the United States as a, place to model their own individual liberties in some sense. I feel like that's changing a little bit now, but
maybe a big part of our theme has been what is being hidden from ourselves. How does narcissism hide us from ourselves, from self-discovery? How does also Echo's example hide us from ourselves? Just as a light note, and maybe last thing I'll say is that I wanted to give a song because it made me think of it after giving Ding Dang and Les Claypool a shout out. What's Behind the Mask is a great song by the Cramps.
Great song.
And yeah, great song. And I was just reading the lyrics, and I've been seeing you for months coming to this place. Now what I want to know is, honey, when can I see your face? I know you've been hiding something, secrets in your past. Whoa, baby, I got to know what's behind the mask. So if we create a persona, how is it that we're serving a persona that isn't authentically us? In which case, if others can tap into how we manufacture our persona, can they manipulate us and cause a situation where we're no longer looking in a mirror and seeing ourselves? Or is self-love being exasperated and used as a way to harm our relationships to one another? That's a great way to find social decay. And if anyone who's rooting for social decay would get between how people know each other and how people love each other.
That's totally true. I think, we're going to have to do a whole episode on Eastern philosophy, Sun Tzu, Lao Tzu, Confucius even. And, Confucius is, maybe he's starting to be cool now. I don't know what's going on with the kids these days, but Confucius is actually important. And the bottom line is, the more you work at making opportunity for yourself, I know this sounds crazy to anybody who's given free lunch all their lives, but the more you work at making opportunities for yourself, the more opportunities there are. And so responsibility and freedom of opportunity in that respect, because freedom of opportunity is a specific kind of freedom. Remember, we're always going to break down words. You could imagine that you have no obligation. I mean, that's amazing. When you're a kid and you don't get in trouble for consequences, that's amazing. But yeah, the man who says he can and the man who says he can't are both correct.
How's Zen?
Yeah, I mean, and he didn't even like Zen. So how about that? How about them apples? But yeah, totally. Confucius did what he had to do. He thought vinegar tasted bitter. That's why Lao Tzu is pretty great also, because Lao Tzu was like, well, vinegar is great on bread with olive oil.
My Panda Express fortune cookie yesterday was seize every opportunity to grow. And not many do I get that I think are worth sharing or contemplating, but that was one.
Be very careful with human growth hormone and steroids. But yeah, other than that, if it's just an emotional growth, I'm pro emotional growth hormones. And,
yeah, I see your point.
Yeah.
Good point.
Well, I was just gonna say, I don't know. I think it is kind of important. I guess we did talk a little bit about humility, but I always kind of considered like Buddhism as kind of being a good source for humility as well, because a lot of it focuses on egolessness. I don't know if we mentioned that earlier, but I just wanted to kind of throw that in there. Siddhartha made a lot of good points. See the illusion of ego to kind of like be with the collective more. I don't really consider myself to be a collectivist. I kind of see myself more in the middle, between those two different worlds, between individualism and collectivism. But, he does make a lot of good points so that we can kind of like lower our ego so that we're not as narcissistic within our personality to, kind of be able to meet ourselves within a larger group. We got to be able to lower ourselves to be able to work with others and, give and take.
Siddhartha is the ultimate, check your privilege example, right? Because he's like, for his birthday, he wanted the only thing he didn't have, and that was suffering. So just show it to me. So, everything about Siddhartha kind of screams the modern problem that most people are starting to, come to terms with, is that, their life is not as bad as it could have been. There are a lot of people that are still digging cobalt mines and dying in the worst of circumstances without clean water. It's less than it's ever been, or maybe not ever before, but recently, it's been pretty bad recently. So things are starting to look like there's a potential for progress, but that doesn't mean everyone's living in that perfect scenario. And
Siddhartha could have gone down the path as narcissist. What interfered his vision of enlightenment? Having seen others smothered in mud and not being able to reach their petals towards heaven. What is it about shaking off the mud of others, helping them bloom, helps ourselves bloom, and helps us express our deep connection to one another? Ego dissolving.
He also came from a world of riches. He kind of came from, I guess, a sense of a, overprivileged life in a lot of ways.
Came from the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Same with Narcissus. Narcissus too. His mother didn't want him to know himself so that he could have everything he ever dreamed, and it ended up destroying him. That's about child rearing as well. How do we raise our children? What do we want the next generations to know? What wisdom do we offer?
I think Terrence McKenna put it in a way that is important. It's ego destruction is overrated, but ego dissolution is much better, because you can't forget where to put your own fork. You have to have an ego enough to elevate yourself as well as everyone else. Don't be so humble you cripple yourself.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs: physiological needs ground your safety of needs, belonging and love needs, esteem needs, and then you can reach self-actualization once you've felt that security.
One other thing, I think both Aristotle and Siddhartha kind of made this point together. Aristotle, it was virtue, but with Buddha, it was the middle way. And it was really kind of balancing out ego and egolessness in a lot of senses. But I think Aristotle went a little bit further and applied it to, I guess, a lot of different things, not just the ego, but virtue kind of being like that center point to kind of like, I guess, guide your character so you can be, just more center minded. I just want to throw that in.
Beautiful.
That's what we're looking for.
Yeah. All right, everybody. I really appreciate that you came out and did this. We're going to do the next one on, I think love might be. Well, I don't want to announce it unless we're wrong, because we might change it up a bit. We're definitely going to talk about love, and we'll talk about Wilhelm Reich a bit. That's for sure.
All right. Well, I love you guys.
Love you very much.
Too. Hey, I think we should do a part 2 as well to this, to
ego.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to go deeper. I want to talk about, when I started thinking about it, like now I can see how we can take this, especially if we use like Eastern philosophy and maybe look at Teresa de Avila's Sacred Spaces of the Mind. Where are we in the hierarchy of the celestial bureaucracy all of a sudden? It looks more interesting when we start to depersonalize, when we're not just a person, but we're part of this system of organs, of cells, of biology, of geology, of stardust, and it's all part of this thing that's coming out from the Big Bang or whatever it's supposed to be coming out from. We're supposed to be the cogs in this expansion. Like, who are we, and what are we having pride in, and what is our ego? Because that makes ego seem way weirder. That we even have it. All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Talk to you soon.
Adios, amigos. Bones.
Comes higher and you sit there in yourself looking mighty fine. Oh, yeah.
out to my advice, the recipe for better life. Don't follow your heart, it might only let you down. Follow only reason, emotions lead to treason. Only one thing will never let you down. To believe in yourself, believe in the reasons that you have laid out in the argument that will last forever. No one can tell you where to go or why. It is within you to figure it out. Using the mind and using the freedom to engage with different ideas. Listen now to my advice, the truth can often be disguised. Don't follow your heart, it might only let you down. Follow only reason, emotions lead to treason. Only one thing will never let you down. To believe in yourself, believe in the reasons that you have laid out in the argument that will last forever. Listen to the voice of reason, listen to the arguments. Listen to the voice of reason, listen to the arguments. Listen to the voice of reason, listen to the arguments. Listen to the voice of reason, listen to the arguments. Don't follow your heart, oh no, it might only let you down. Follow only reason, cause emotions lead to treason. And believe in yourself, believe in the reasons that you have laid out in the argument that will last forever.